So now, ladies and gentlemen, live and in colour, it's Mr. Wayne Love Juice.
The other day our producer Louis had a chat with an interesting chappie who said that the YouTube algorithms really aren't that happy. If a channel only broadcasts once a week, so we decided we could texture whenever we've got a piece of news in our new book on the Track Extra.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. My name is John Downs. I'm the director of the Centre for Fortean Zoology, and welcome to another episode of On the Track Extra. For those of you not aware, it's a show we put out twice a week, every Wednesday evening at about 6:30 for about quarter of an hour, and every Saturday afternoon at 3 for about twice that. And also we have another show now that we put out once a month on the last Wednesday of the month, and it's called the Last Wednesday of the Month Show. We started for the first time we broadcast, although it's been in the planning stage for several years. We broadcast our first episode on the last Wednesday of April, and you can see it here on CFZ TV. I will make sure there is a link in the show notes below. I want to say a big thank you to my regular guests who are going to be, and are already, Ian Squibbs and Dave Scott from CFZ Canada, and I want to say a big thank you to my co-host, the lovely Vivian Powell, because if it hadn't been for Viv, this show wouldn't have happened, because Viv owns the Simply Spooky network, and after I have appeared as guest and then stand-in co-host while her normal co-host Dan Winters off on the sick list, I finally realised that I rather like doing live shows, and she asked me if we wanted to do a live show, and I said yeah, but why not do one like this, and came up with the idea that Dave Scott had come up with to me over a year ago, and she said yeah, let's do it, and so we did it. And I think you'll see from this brief clip that it was great fun. The more I look at it, I think it's some sort of a weird wave.
The loch as well is very narrow considering its length, isn't it? It's a long body of water. 20 something miles long, 26 or something like that, and it's not very wide. So I think that maybe as well contributes to its wave formation. But yes, we can't rule anything out until it's been proved, and we can still believe there's a monster there if we want to.
Rob's come up with something quite interesting.
What's that, Robert? Yeah,
I think this is what we're looking at. We're looking at that end of the water, and the bit of what we're seeing is that. If we can see that, that looks exactly like the photo, doesn't it? That there. That's exactly like the photo. And if we were to drain the loch, that's what we'd see. So there, problem solved.
Yeah. I was there, Robert, in the middle of the winter once, and the water of the loch was warmer than the air around. It was bloody freezing cold, and there was steam coming off the loch. And that was incredibly strange to see steam rising off the lake in the middle of the winter when it was so cold that I was bundled up in a jumper and my leather jacket and a big hat and everything just to try and keep myself warm.
even if you don't believe there's a monster there, it's good to go, isn't it? It's such an atmospheric place, steeped in history. It's not just the monster; it's all the stuff that's gone on there. You've got the cat, Alistair Crowley's house, which has recently been rebuilt. You've got the cemetery below the house. It's just an amazing place.
And there is an area of woodland on the shores of the lake that I think Tim Dinsdale was the first person who wrote about it, said that it felt evil there, that there was a unearthly presence around him. Not Tim Dinsdale, it was, what's his name, the other guy. Ian, who was it who wrote The Dragon and the Disc? Ted Holiday. Ted Holiday.
Ted Holiday.
And my old mate Lee Walker, who died a couple of years ago, God rest his soul, he said that he'd been to those and had the same sort of experiences. I enjoyed doing the show massively, and we're looking forward to next month, and plans are already afoot to make next month even better. Have a look at the show, tell me what you think, and tell me what you'd like to see on it in the comments below. Now, this week, I've seen my hair sticking out. This is quite interesting because my hair is sticking out like a crest, and the first creature we're going to be talking about today has a very notable crest. The word migrants is something which has become one of those buzzwords in contemporary news, and for most people means something completely different than it used to. However, as a zoologist, especially as a Fortean zoologist, the word migrant is actually quite a positive one, and I'm fascinated when different creatures, which usually migrate from point A to point B, somehow come off course and end up in Britain. And the first creature we're going to be talking about is this. This bird is a hoopoe, or at least that's the way I have always pronounced it ever since my grandmother was lucky enough to see one in her garden in Hampshire when I was a very little boy, and got in the local paper about it, and she was very proud of that achievement. However, a few years ago, when Richard Freeman and the gang went back to Russia for their second trip to Kabardino-Balkaria, Richard saw one and pronounced it hoopoo. And there has been an ongoing argument between me and Richard ever since as to whether you pronounce the bird spelt Hoopoe, hoopoe or hoopoo. And I decided, because this time we are going to be talking about these singular birds, I was going to put the matter to bed once and for all. And so I looked it up, and guess what? It can be... Yes?
It's clearly hoopoe.
It is clearly hoopoe, but there are two ways that one can pronounce it, apparently, V. So, oh, by the way, V. McQuinn's here. Say hello to the boys and girls, V.
Hello.
It is hoopoe, but it can also be pronounced hoopoo. So both Richard and I were right, and as I learnt about it from my grandmother, I claim primogeniture, probably, and I've decided for the rest of this show I'm calling it a hoopoe, not a hoopoo. They are fantastic looking creatures, and they're found all over the Middle East, Southern Europe, and parts of Africa. Look at this, it's got a very, very wide distribution. But if you look closely, you can see that there is some concern between whether there is one species of hoopoe, two species of hoopoe, or three species of hoopoe. This is not counting the extinct St. Helena hoopoe, which, by the way, if you just heard that, that was a disagreement, a filial disagreement between Squeaky and Lilith, who are having a fight on the floor at the moment as we speak. Stop it, you two!
Faster, pussycat. Go, go.
Yeah, I thought if I went psst, it might actually achieve something, but it didn't.
No, it just wound them up.
I'm afraid so, dear boy, I'm afraid so.
They each thought it was the other one being nappy.
Yeah, they're now staring at each other.
Wait till they start going.
Well then,
that's always hilarious.
not when I'm trying to film a show about hoopos, it's not. By the way, any of you who are actually following this show as far as, oh, Lilith has won the Battle of the Staring competition.
Ah.
Squeaky is just slunk off in a corner. Lilith is now... Lilith is coming here, look! Come here, conquering hero.
Yes. Didn't name her after the queen of the Jewish demons for nothing, did you?
No, I did not, did I, Cat? Oh, blimey, Cat. You've got quite a lot of bits of fluff, bits of fur missing. Oh, baby girl. Oh, you've been a brave queen, haven't you?
Is that from tussling?
That's from tussling.
Oh.
Anyway, she is now sitting on me, and this is not an easy way of actually, doing the show about hoopos, but we will carry on. There are generally, these days, thought to be 2 or 3 species of hoopoe. The African hoopoe, the Eurasian hoopoe, and the Madagascan hoopoe. No one seems to doubt that the Madagascan hoopoe, like its long-defunct St. Helena cousin, is a species in its own right. But there are all sorts of disagreements between the people who think that the African and Eurasian hoopoes are the same species, and the people who think that African and Eurasian hoopoes are different species. Whether or not the African hoopoe and the Eurasian hoopoe are separate species doesn't really matter at this point. You can see from the map that they occupy different territories and that their plumage and appearance is distinct enough to make them to be generally agreed to be separate at least a subspecific level. There's another subspecies that is being considered for full specieshood in parts of India, but that's another story entirely. But before I leave the taxonomy of the hoopos and get on with the reason that hoopos is the subject or part of the subject of this week's On the Track Extra, let's go back to the St. Helena hoopoe, because I didn't realise that although it was supposed to have been hunted to extinction in the 15th or 16th century, it is only known from one subfossil skeleton, which is here. But much to my surprise, as a big fan of the good Dr. Hunter S. Thompson, I found that there is actually a depiction of the St. Helena Hoopoe, done here by none other than Ralph Steadman, who accompanied the good doctor on his legendary Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas trip. And to have Fear and Loathing in St. Helena is just mildly entertaining. But now, why are we talking about Hoopoes? As I have said before on this show, I'm a great fan of a guy called John Donne, who wrote a brilliant book in which he travelled all over Britain in one summer trying to see every species of British orchid, and I recommend it to anyone. It's a fantastic book. But he also writes the weekly roundup news for the Rare Bird Alerts, which is something that I follow on what used to be Twitter and what is also on various other social media thingamybobs, and I follow them on their website, and I do have their up-to-date clever appy thing, but I can't work out how to use it. So let me just quote you here. I'm going to read from what John wrote in the news for the 21st to the 27th of March. There's only one place we can start the passerines this week, and that's with Hoopoe. Not just a pretty face, they were turning up en masse during the week, with barely a day going by without dozens of new birds reported. Perhaps there was some recycling going on here and there as mobile birds filtered inside or inland or bounced between sites. Even non-birders were likely to see and pass comment on something as leery as a hoopoe. But the takeaway message this week was that we enjoyed an absolute deluge of that kind. Just how many then? Somewhere in the region of 170 birds were reported across the week, the vast majority of them hitting southwest England and southern Ireland, but outliers penetrating north into Scotland too. Some sites enjoyed notable hauls, the highest British count being 10 on St Martin's and the Isle of Scilly on the 23rd, while 4 were present near Dunmore and County Waterford on the 24th. And it goes on from there. Then the following week he writes, "Here today and gone tomorrow. Most of the prior week's hoopoe had better things to be doing than hanging around. A few did, and not a day went by this past week without a handful being reported, but we were a long way off the numbers recorded during the prior week's influx. That is, until the 2nd, that's the 2nd of April, when it all kicked off again with some 75 birds reported, making up a large proportion of 110 or so seen during the week as a whole, with about 40 more added on the 3rd for good measure. Notable tallies on the 2nd were 7 birds at Galliahead in County Cork, and at least 9 on St Mary's in the Isles of Scilly." And so it continued for another week or so. What caused this enormous population explosion in the British hoopoe population? Well, this usually is because of migrations caused by population pressure elsewhere in their range. That is the reason, for example, that the yellow-legged tortoiseshell, Xanthomelas, ended up as a British species a few years ago. And that is the reason that most major changes in populations of a species happen, because of population pressure and the resulting population dynamics in the country of origin. But we have no idea why in this case it's happened, because although they are still reported from across Western and Southwestern Europe, they are noticeably rarer than they were even a few years ago. And the one place in the whole of their range where they're getting more popular and where they're getting more common, probably rather than popular, is in Sheikh al-Shamar, a little tip of the Sinai Peninsula, of all places, where a small breeding population has got larger and larger and larger, and they have stayed there all year round without any population migration. I don't see how this could have anything to do with the large numbers of hoopoe which have turned up in Britain this month, but it's still an exciting story, and I'm very glad to have been able to share it with you. If you've got any other bright ideas of what could have caused this, please let me know. If you've seen a hoopoe yourselves, even better if you photographed a hoopoe yourselves, because my grandmother was always very, very angry that she saw a hoopoe in her garden, but she didn't have a camera, so she couldn't actually prove it. But enough of grandmothers and enough of hoopoes. I did say at the beginning that this was about various migrant species. Well, the hoopoes are the biggest and most notable. But also, so far this year, it is now the third or fourth year on the trot that we are seeing large numbers of the striped hawk moth. I've just had to re-record what I said before, because I said before the silver striped hawk moth, which is a much rarer creature and still very, very rarely found in Britain. But the striped hawk moth, which is found all the way across southern Europe, the Middle East, east to the Far East, and much of Africa, is described as being an extremely rare visitor to British shores. That is, up until 4 years ago, when they started arriving in sizable numbers. And this year, it's happening again. And I think we're going to get to the stage soon that Hyles livonica, the striped hawk moth, will be recognized as a resident, or at least a seasonal breeding resident of the British Isles, which I think would be absolutely fantastic because they're absolutely wonderful insects, and I very much look forward to seeing one for myself one of these days. That's one of the reasons I'm so pleased that Miss Guinevere has inherited the CFZ moth trap, because I hope she's going to be able to catch one in her garden this season. That would be absolutely fantastic. Now, I did mention migrants, plural. What else have I got for you? Well, the last migrant, which occasionally in some years has been known in Britain for centuries, and is known under the English name of the Painted Lady. My father always used to think it was very funny when I said I was going out with my butterfly net to see if I could catch painted ladies. And he'd say, "Boy, you're far too young for that," and then chortle at his own extreme cleverness, which is the sort of thing me and Richard still do today. But the Painted Lady has been known as a visiting species to Britain for centuries. For some years, we have far larger influxes. And this year looks like it might be going to be one of those years, because already in southern Europe, they are arriving in some numbers, and they have arrived quite noticeably in Britain. Not in as many numbers as one would like. I still remember back at 2008 was an absolutely magnificent year for painted ladies. You could see them everywhere. But it's lovely to have them coming back this year. And again, I hope they continue to thrive and breed here, because the story of the Painted Lady is a magnificently strange one. They overwinter in sub-Saharan Africa, and they make their way north, breeding as they go. So the ones that leave sub-Saharan Africa don't actually turn up in Britain. It's the children or grandchildren of them that turn up in Britain. And they get bigger and bigger, and more. The caterpillars get bigger and the adults get beefier as they go further north. For years it was thought that this was all really rather pointless, because they stayed in Britain and Britain was too cold for them to overwinter. So apart from the very few individuals who were clever enough or lucky enough to hide in houses over winter, most of them would die of cold. And it was believed they didn't migrate south again. But again, within the last 10 years, it's been noticed that flying incredibly high up in the sky, large flocks of British-born, British-bred painted ladies are flying southwards and making their way back to Africa. And I've read, although I can't substantiate it, that although on the way north they stop off at several different spots, and it is, like I said, grandchildren of the original ones leaving Africa that turn up in Britain, that the British ones are so beefy and so powerful that they fly all the way back down to sub-Saharan Africa under their own steam. I can't find where I found that reference, so I can't substantiate it, but if it's true, it tells us something about good British spunk, eh? What do you think, Mr. McCrimmon?
Absolutely, good British spunk.
And I think everybody should be full of good British spunk, don't you, Mr. McCrimmon?
Yes, I love British. You are
So, Mr. McCrinnan, I've now got your picture up. Instead of a picture of a moth, we have you. I'm going to be back on Saturday, and on Saturday we have the second part of my interview with Mick McLaren of the Winter Hill investigation team. Hurrah for Mick McLaren, he's a good bloke. And I'm going to be back. Like I said, are you going to be there on Saturday when Mr. McCrinnan? You're going to be watching. So if you're watching,
full of vim, it's full of British vim,
vim and vigour. And so, Mr. McCrinnan, if you're there watching, and I'm there doing the stuff I normally do on a Saturday afternoon, you know, the notifications, the live chat, and all the other gubbins I do before I then go to sleep for the rest of the afternoon, then, Mr. McCrinnan, I'm sure that I will be...
I am not a number, I'm a free man.
You made that joke last time. Seeing you!